The year is 2035. The sun shines brightly outside as it makes its way through the cloudless sky. Everything seems perfect until you step outside and find yourself face down in a puddle of your own blood. You look up to see an army of people with the same crimson-colored liquid dripping down their mouths standing above you, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to be looking at T-Supporter waking up from a coma only to bring about the zombie apocalypse. The last thing you remember was the burning sensation in your chest as you got impaled by the rebar. Now here you are, drenched in blood, but the wound has completely healed. Confused, you try to stand up, but your legs feel weak and rubbery. But suddenly, the ground begins to shake. People run past you in a panic, screaming, "They're coming, they're coming." What are they talking about? You have no idea, but before you can ask anyone, the horde of people with blood dripping from their mouths begin to charge at you. They look hungry and angry, and you slowly realize that this is the end for you. As the first person lunges at you, their teeth long and sharp like a carnivorous animal, you get a good look at their face. It's pale, rotting, and covered in dirt. A low growl comes from their throat as their saliva drips onto your face. This isn't just any person, this is a zombie, and now you're trapped in a zombie apocalypse. T-supplements are designed to help men and women who struggle with low testosterone levels improve their sexual performance and energy. But what happens when a new formula is released and it's found to contain something more sinister than anyone could have imagined? Let's take a look at how this terrifying situation could play out. Mark had been struggling lately. His wife had left him for a younger man. His job was stressful and his son was getting married. He felt like he was constantly exhausted and just couldn't seem to get ahead. One day he saw a commercial for a new tea supplement called Primetime. The ad featured a muscular man with a full head of hair confidently striding down the beach. The tagline read, "Turn back time with Primetime." Intrigued, Mark decided to give the supplement a try. After taking the pills for a few weeks, he started feeling more energized and confident. His muscles seemed to be filled with new strength and his libido had returned. It was everything that the commercial had promised and more. However, little did Mark know that he was unknowingly participating in a sinister plan that would change the course of human history forever. One evening, while watching the news, Mark saw a report about a mysterious illness that was sweeping across the country. People were becoming infected with a virus that caused them to become violent and disoriented. The CDC was working hard to find a cure, but so far there was nothing they could do to stop the spread of the disease. As he watched the news unfold, Mark had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. He could unshake the feeling that the illness somehow connected to the tea supplement he had been taking. He tried to dismiss the thought, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The symptoms of the illness were similar to the side effects listed on the Primetime website. Could it be possible that the supplement was causing people to become infected? He had to know for sure. Mark decided to contact the company directly. He called the number on the website and asked to speak to someone about the recent news reports. The person on the other end of the line was polite but dismissive. They told him that there had been no link between Primetime and the mysterious illness and that he should not stop taking the supplement. But Mark was not convinced. He continued to research the illness, and the more he learned, the more convinced he became that Primetime was responsible. He decided to stop taking the supplement and warn his friends and family about the possible dangers. But it was too late. The virus had already spread and there was no turning back. As the days passed, the situation grew worse. The illness was spreading rapidly and the CDC was still unable to find a cure. Hospitals were overwhelmed and people were dying left and right. Mark watched in horror as the world around him descended into chaos. He had done everything he could to try to stop it, but it was too late. The damage had been done. One day Mark was at the grocery store when he saw a group of people fighting over food. It was clear that the breakdown of society was complete. There was no hope for a cure and the virus would likely continue to spread until everyone was infected. Mark knew he had to get out of there before things got violent. But as he turned to leave, he saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. One of the people in the store was someone he knew, a friend of his named Tom. But something was wrong. Tom's skin was pale and his eyes were blank. He didn't seem to be aware of what was going on around him. Mark cautiously approached Tom and asked if he was all right. Tom turned to him and a low growl came from his throat. Mark realized with a start that Tom was infected. The virus had taken hold of him and turned him into one of the living dead. Before Mark could react, Tom lunged at him, his teeth bared in a snarl. Mark screamed and ran for his life. He could hear Tom behind him, his heavy footsteps pounding on the floor. Mark knew he couldn't outrun the infected for long. He had to find a way to fight back. As he ran, he looked around for something he could use as a weapon. That's when he saw it, a metal pipe jutting out from the side of a building. Mark grabbed the pipe and turned to face Tom. The infected was close behind him now, his breath hot on his neck. Mark swung the pipe in a wide arc, connecting with Tom's head. The pipe dented, but Tom didn't seem to care. He kept coming forward, his eyes fixed on Mark. Mark swung again and again, trying to keep Tom away from him. But it was no use. The infected was relentless. Finally, Mark felt something give way and Tom collapsed to the ground. Mark stood over the fallen figure, his heart pounding in his chest. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He knew that there were more infected out there and that he would have to keep fighting to survive. Mark took a deep breath and prepared himself for what came next. He knew that the world would never be the same again. A few weeks after the outbreak began, Mark found himself in a secluded cabin in the woods. He had managed to evade the infected and had been surviving off the grid ever since. But he was starting to run low on supplies, and he needed to make a trip to the nearby town to restock. But he knew that going into town was dangerous. The infected were everywhere and there was no telling what he might encounter. But Mark had no choice. He needed supplies and he had to risk it all to get them. As he made his way through the deserted streets, he could feel the tension building inside of him. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of leaves made him jump. He was on edge, waiting for the inevitable attack. Then he heard it, a low growl coming from an abandoned car. Mark froze and slowly turned to face the sound. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a figure emerge from the car. It was one of the infected, and it was heading straight for him. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as the infected closed in on him. He knew that this was it, that this was the end. But then something unexpected happened. The infected suddenly stopped in its tracks and collapsed to the ground. Mark stared in disbelief as the figure twitched and then went still. He couldn't believe his eyes. Was the infected did it die? Mark cautiously approached the fallen figure and knelt down beside it. He could see that the infected was no longer moving, that it was truly dead. But then he noticed something strange. The infected's eyes were glowing an eerie green. Mark recoiled in horror as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just an ordinary zombie. This was a super zombie. And this was the beginning of the end. The super zombies were more powerful and smarter than the regular infected. They were able to move faster, think more strategically, and were immune to most forms of damage. Mark knew that this was bad news. If the super zombies were evolving, then it meant that the regular zombies were as well. And if he couldn't outrun them or outfight them, then he would be doomed. Mark stood up and backed away from the super zombie. He knew that he couldn't stay in this town any longer. He had to get out while he still could. But as he turned to go, he saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. In the distance, he saw a group of super zombies heading in his direction. They were fast and relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had him. Mark took off running, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the super zombies behind him, their footsteps pounding on the pavement. He could feel their hot breath on his neck, but Mark refused to give up. He knew that he had to keep going. He ran for what felt like hours, his lungs burning and his legs heavy, but he couldn't stop, not when the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. As the sun began to set, Mark knew that he had to find somewhere to hide. He couldn't stay out in the open any longer. The super zombies could pick him off easily. That's when he saw it, a small cabin hidden deep in the woods. Mark stumbled towards the cabin, his body aching and his mind racing. He had to get inside, lock the doors and windows, and hope that the super zombies wouldn't find him. But as he reached for the door, he heard a voice. Well, 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 what do we have here? A lone survivor. Mark whirled around and saw a group of super zombies standing behind him. They were blocking the entrance to the cabin and they weren't leaving without him. Mark knew that he was trapped, that there was nowhere else to run. The super zombies closed in on him, their eyes glowing an eerie green in the darkness. He could feel their hot breath on his neck, their claws digging into his clothes. He could hear their voices, raspy and distorted, chanting, "Brains, brains, brains." Mark screamed and tried to fight back, but it was no use. The super zombies were too strong and too relentless. Finally, they overpowered him and dragged him to the ground. Mark looked up at the super zombies, his eyes filled with terror. He could feel their claws digging into his flesh, tearing at his clothes. He could hear their voices, raspy and distorted, chanting, "Brains, brains, brains, brains." Then everything went black. The super zombies dragged Mark's limp body into the forest and disappeared into the darkness. The fireflies blinked on, casting an eerie glow on the forest floor. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. And as the night wore on, the forest grew darker and darker until finally, all that was left was the darkness and the silence.